if I was to pick one characteristic, I would say empathy. And at the end of the day, any decision made needs to be and should be in the best interest of students. Student learning, student outcomes, student well-being. And being able to put yourself in another person's shoes changes the perspective and can change the dynamics of decisions made. So I would like to see school leaders, system leaders, have empathy in the decisions they make and the approaches they take to making those decisions.
Okay.
As the Thames Valley Board was implementing full-day kindergarten, we found that many families were challenged in terms of the rollout. So, for example, a school down the road might have full-day kindergarten, which alleviated the need for daycare, which is great savings for families. But my school, the school closest to me, wasn't. And so my daughter or son was out of area at that school, and I'm talking about the example. So an individual son or daughter was out of area attending school A down the road with full-day kindergarten and had to leave because the attendance was so great. The school system had to require parents to remove their children from out-of-area schools and send them to their designated neighborhood school. So there were a number of examples where parents were going to have financial hardship. Daycare, for example. Parents, grandparents might look after a son or daughter, were able to drop off at full-day kindergarten, but couldn't mind the child for half a day at school B. So we had to make some very difficult decisions, and there was one time I intervened because a single parent was going to experience financial hardship as a result of the son being removed from a full-day kindergarten out of area school. So I reversed that decision, I think because of empathy, putting myself in the parent's shoes. Because the superintendent who made that decision disagreed with mine. But that's okay, because there were times as a principal, there were times as a superintendent, there were times as a director, I had to reverse the decision of an individual who reported to me. That's my job. That's why I was hired.
So
There's a push and pull with any type of decision. And 9 times out of the 10, the decision's consistent with policies, procedures, with agreed to processes. And they're rational, and they make sense. But we're dealing with human nature. We're dealing with moms and dads and kids, and everything doesn't line up. And every once in a while, you have to take a look at the fallout or the implications of a decision made and look at what's the consequence if I reverse that decision. But as long as you know your why, you're being a leader, as long as you have a focus on what's best for the student, best for the child, then everything else falls away. And I have to sleep at night. And if I find that I couldn't sleep at night because I'm wrestling with the right thing to do, then I know I have to go back and make another decision. Well, to address the first question, there's a lot of research out there in terms of what makes up a good leader. And you'd be surprised that it's pretty consistent in terms of the top 4 characteristics that define good leadership. So I'm thinking of Kouzes and Posner, sorry. They did a literature review, and they found that the top 4 characteristics of effective leaders were honesty, visionary, in other words, being able to look forward, motivational, and competence. So I would add 2 more, though, to that group from my own experience. And one would be resilience. Because of the political climate and the pressures that go along with the role in terms of school leadership, you need resilience. And the last one that I would add is knowledge of your why. Sinek talks about knowing your why, knowing why you want to be a leader, what drives you, because that's the window through which the staff and the community and students view your abilities. So I would definitely define, I agree with the research in terms of the top 4. In terms of having your character change to fit your leadership or vice versa. That's the way I'm interpreting it. I think your leadership has to be an extension of who you are. So in other words, your leadership should be reflective of your style, your character. I found very early on that being a teacher, students can pick up whether you're trying to fake it or not. Well, the same is true being a school administrator. And I've been a staff member reporting to a principal who staff couldn't read the principal because she kept changing. She kept changing her leadership style based on the situation or the issue at hand. And you know what? Staff shouldn't guess. Staff shouldn't be guessing how the principal's going to react to a given situation. One of the best things I heard was, I knew you'd say that, or I knew you'd do that, because when the leadership style reflects your own integrity, reflects your own values and beliefs, then there's a cohesiveness that develops, and staff are in sync with the leadership of the school, leadership of a department, leadership of a school system. And I can think of one issue 2 years ago where, as a director, I used to set Fridays aside for school visits. That was the way to stay connected in what was going on in schools. And I remember one school visit where there was a disjointedness between what the principal was saying and doing and what was going on in the school. And I didn't completely understand it. And I had one of those difficult conversations with the principal in the office with the door closed. And I said to the principal, I'm going to come back in 3 months, and these are some of the things I'd like to see. So we set out the timeline, what the issues were, and what course of action the principal could initiate to achieve those outcomes. So I went back in 3 months. They weren't there. So not only did I have to have the conversation with the school principal, I had to have the conversation with the school superintendent. The principal and the superintendent and myself had a dialogue eventually. The principal was able to self-identify what the difficulties she was having, and we were able to support that principal through other supports, EAP, which is Employee Assistance Plan, because there was some difficulty going on. So there was some peripheral issues that she was dealing with. So it is a good news result. Came back to another school, transferred, fresh start, working really well in terms of the fit for the school. And as a principal, we used to match up students with teachers because of learning styles and teaching styles. Well, I think the same thing has to happen. I mean, the principal needs to know his or her staff so that you can do the assignments that are the best fit. Same with superintendents and a school system, trying to fit a principal with a school and a community, because the school is not just four walls. The school is in the community. And if I was to take a look at the top 3 priorities in terms of leadership, being successful, they would be relationships, relationships, and relationships. And if you don't have any of those 3, your job can be a real struggle. Your integrity, I think, is the window into everything you do. And part of the building of relationships part is being able to adapt to given situations. And those leaders who have difficulty adapting will have difficulty going on in the future, because education's changing at such a rapid pace, more so than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Any type of entry plan I had as a school principal or superintendent, I talked about my expectations, my leadership style. I talked about transformational leadership, which is the style I believe in wholeheartedly, where you establish a team, you establish the parameters, but you let the team do the work because of the expertise and the experience within the team. And you set the parameters, you monitor the parameters. Sometimes you have to have those difficult conversations to reestablish the parameters. But transformational leadership, once described to a staff, my actions have to show support of that model so that there isn't contradictory type approach, because that ruins your integrity as a leader. That's a great question. A lot of the research you take a look at in terms of the huge divide between theory and practice. I don't believe that exists. I think we've done a lot in education to overcome that, in that the effective school leader needs to incorporate both theory and practice. So for example, if you take a look at the Ontario framework, Ontario Leadership Framework, and Ken Leithwood's done a really great analysis of that framework. It incorporates best practices developed through theory and research in terms of practical application in the school or a school system, and it focuses on 4 areas. It talks about the relationship aspect. First and foremost, I remind you, the value of relationships. It talks about student learning, enhancing student learning. It talks about developing organizational structure, and the accountability. And woven all throughout that framework are direct links to theory, best practices developed because of theoretical approaches. And how do you incorporate that in a classroom? How do you incorporate that in a school environment? Indeed, how do you incorporate that into a system? So I believe that when we take a look at where the Ontario government's going in terms of enhancing student learning, they've taken theoretical approaches developed from research into, and through training of teachers and school principals, they've taken into the school. So I know that when I was a school principal, and even before as a teacher, we used to think, convince us this is good for kids, and then we'll try it. Well, roles have flipped, and Ontario Principal Council has a lot of good material where, you know what, learning cycles, for example, try it first and see the results. I, as a superintendent, would attend learning cycle meetings, and I can refer to one where there was a bunch of a group of grade 1 teachers at a learning cycle, and implementing some of the research that they had done, the daily research, the data collection, the analysis, the interpretation, and extended that into changed lesson formats. And the results were astounding. Now, would those teachers have done it without being told to do it first, trying it first? I'm not sure. But being asked to try it first and seeing the results, they were then convinced that the applications that they'd implemented in the classroom actually did work. Some of the comments were, I would never have guessed that Johnny would have been capable of doing that. I would never have believed that my class would have been able to perform at such a high level. Full day kindergarten is another area that is a very good example of theory into practice. And some of the research that Charles Pascal had implemented in terms of developing the document, the recommendations, went to theoretical approaches elsewhere in Sweden, Finland, Denmark. And we're now seeing results of students in full day kindergarten where we, as a system in Ontario, are going to have to change the grade 1 program, the grade 2 program, and subsequently all the way through, because students are now entering grade 1 at a much higher level of capacity and capability than they were 10 years ago. Absolutely. We talk about education being, teaching being an art and a science. Well, it's the same way all the way across. It's not just teaching being an art and a science. School administrators, it's an art and a science. Being a superintendent is an art and a science. Being a director is an art and a science.